Welcome to Rico 12. My name is Justin, and I'm a child of an all-powerful and all-loving God and a recovering addict, and am blessed to be the host of this meeting and podcast. Rico 12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addictions of all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking this path. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented so many fellowships, addictions, and afflictions, and we look forward to continuing to add to the diversity of speakers and backgrounds. Today's speaker for the 183rd meeting is Matt D., who will be speaking on his experience of becoming grateful to be married to a sexaholic. And we'll get to his talk in the Q&A afterwards here in just a minute. First, for a little bit of business. The Rico 12 family of recovery resources continues to grow and have more resources for the addict and the loved ones of those addicted. If you have not listened to any of the other Rico 12 podcasts, including Rico 12 Shares, Rico 12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M., or the Big Book Roundtable podcasts, I highly recommend you check them out wherever you listen to podcasts. The links to all of these podcasts are in the show notes of this and all Rico 12 episodes. I'm super excited about all of these resources and more to come. Your donations and subscriptions are making this all possible, as there are costs to build and maintain all of them. On that note, Rico 12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our Step 12 in this manner. I want to thank a few of our spearheads and donors. Thank you to Leslie, Kimberly, Daniela, and Sophia for your donations this last week. Those really help in our mission to share this message with others. Now, if you out there would like to become a spearhead and make some donation here to help us in this mission, please consider going to www.rico12.com/support and making either a one-time donation or becoming a monthly spearhead donor. I'll put the links to that in the chat of the live meeting and in the show notes. We look forward each week to receiving the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now I'll introduce today's guest speaker. It's Matt D. Now here's a little bit about Matt. Matt's wife's sexaholism brought him to the S-Anon fellowship in December of 2021 as a homicidal, suicidal lost cause. After a slow start, he learned through the principles of the 12 steps and the tools of S-Anon to love God, his wife, his children, and his fellows, and to take a solution-based action to break the patterns of codependency in his life. The lessons he's learned in S-Anon have also helped him to tackle his drug and alcohol addictions. He is now an S-Anon success story, living his best life as one who is happy, joyous, and free. Matt, take it away. The floor is yours, brother.
First of all, thanks, Justin, for your service, man. I appreciate you having me on the podcast. And to everybody listening, what's up? I'm Matt D. from St. Louis. I'm a grateful member of S-Anon and have been so since December 4th, 2021. It's good for me to be here today. I'd like to start with the short version of the S-Anon problem that's on page 125 of our Green Book. S-Anon members have much in common with the friends and relatives of other addicted people. Most of us grew up in families with secrets, and we were not taught to think about our own needs and take positive action to meet them. We chose friends and partners who could not or would not love and support us in a healthy way. We lived life from the standpoint of victims and perceived any personal criticism as a threat. For most of us, anger, fear, and depression were nearly constant. We acquired some unhealthy beliefs about ourselves very early in our lives, that we were not worthwhile and lovable, that we were able to control other people's behavior, and that sex was the most important sign of love. We've also felt the shame of thinking we were responsible for the sexaholic behavior of a family member or friend. Our self-esteem dropped to low levels, and we doubted our attractiveness, our emotions, and our sanity. We felt betrayed by those we loved the most. Many of us were sexually abused, exposed to diseases, and otherwise placed in physical danger. We were often too ashamed to ask for help. Some of us minimized the importance of the sexaholic behavior or denied it until we felt emotionally numb. Others focused on the sexaholic behavior to the point of obsession and tried every known method to control it. Some of us participated in sexual behavior that made us ashamed of ourselves or used sex to manipulate the sexaholic. Some of us misused drugs, alcohol, or food, and others kept so busy that we didn't have time to feel our emotions. We often neglected our health, our jobs, and our children. No matter how we tried to struggle against it, deny it, or minimize its effects, the failure of our efforts to cope with sexaholism brought us to the point of despair. This is what we mean when we say in the first step, our lives have become unmanageable. So everybody, there's no real good way to segue into what comes next, so we'll just dive right in. The story goes that my father used to like raping my mother, and he liked doing it regularly. My mother was not so much a fan, and when she finally grew tired of it, she asked if he wouldn't rather focus his efforts on my sisters and maybe give her a break for a little while. So he obliged, and this is how it began. My father molested my two oldest sisters, sister number 1 and sister number 2. Cousin number 1 and cousin number 2 were molested by their father, and both cousin 1 and cousin 2 had consensual, incestuous relationships with sister number 1, who would eventually molest me. I was also molested by sister number 3, while she simultaneously molested brother 1 and brother 2, both of whom were molested by my stepdad's friend. Brother 1 molested brother 2, sister 4 and sister 5. Sister 5 was also molested by sister 1's boyfriend, cousin 1. Sister 5 was also molested by sister 2's boyfriend, who molested sister 2's daughter. Sister 5's second daughter molested sister 4's first daughter, who was also molested by sister 1's second oldest son. That's the abridged version. And although there's plenty there to qualify me for S-Anon, it's my wife's addiction that brought me to the rooms of recovery. We'll come back to that. After what I've just told you, this is probably stating the obvious. I'm a broken man from a broken family. I realized even before I was in kindergarten that I wasn't normal, that my family wasn't normal, and that my life would never be normal. I wanted to be, and I pretended to be, and I thought I was pretty good at it, but normal kids must be born with some sort of weirdo radar or something, because they'd all be playing at the monkey bars or whatever, and I'd walk over to their group to see if I could play with them. And it's like their spidey senses would click on and warn them of danger or possible contamination, and pew, they'd be gone. Middle school and high school went about the same for me. I was kind of cool, but not cool enough for the popular kids. I was smart enough to take the gifted classes, but I was always the dumbest guy in those classes. I was also a good enough athlete that I could make the all-star team, but I would ride the pine the whole game. A decent musician, but not good enough to be in the bands that I wanted to be in. So I had to hang out with the outcasts, the stoners, the goth kids, the rockers, the kids whose parents should have been in recovery. I had a few reasonably close friends among those outcasts, but it seemed like when their other friends were around, they'd stop paying attention to me. And so I was an outcast among outcasts. That'll bolster your self-esteem. I was seventh oldest of 12 children. My older siblings had bad grades and bad behavior, which commanded a lot of my parents' attention. My younger siblings were still needy and required the same attention. I, however, kept my nose clean for the most part and maintained good grades. So since I didn't need any attention from my parents, I didn't really get any. I was the forgotten middle child. All I ever really wanted was to feel loved. And since I didn't get any of that at home or with my friends, when I turned 18, I dropped out of high school and moved in with the first girl that made me feel wanted. The relationship pretty much sucked all the way up until I discovered the nude photos that some internet dude had been emailing her. And then it really sucked. And after we broke up over it, it sucked even more because I was alone again. My next relationship was when I was 22, and I knew it was a bad idea before I got into it, but I was lonely. My best guess is that she cheated on me with 3 other guys. Just over 2 years after that, I got married. She was beautiful but damaged, which was fine by me because as a fixer-upper, she needed me as much as I needed her. Although her acting out began within 6 months of our having exchanged vows, it wasn't until we'd been married about 6 years that I'd become suspicious of anything. It was intuition more than anything that started me wondering about it. And after the feeling persisted for about a year, I could no longer ignore it. She denied any wrongdoing and began gaslighting me, a technique she employed every time we spoke to this end for the better part of 8 years. Over the next several months, I pressed her into 2 more, quote, confessions. And on both occasions, she confessed to relatively minor indiscretions. But the discrepancies in her recall led me to believe they were lies crafted to appease me and to essentially shut me up. It was during this time that I began abusing Adderall and I stopped sleeping. Instead of sleeping, I obsessively snooped, secretly collecting evidence of her acting out. I collected literally hundreds of pages of evidence, which I referred to during any of about a dozen forced disclosures over the years, waiting for her to slip up so I could point out her discrepancies and demand on-the-spot reconciliation of them. Over the next 3 years, the frequency, the severity, and the riskiness of her acting out had increased significantly. The more she acted out, the more obsessed I became. The more obsessed I became, the more I learned, and the better I got at snooping, the better I wanted to be at snooping. When snooping produced nothing, I interrogated her relentlessly. During the interrogations, I used shame, humiliation, and guilt in an effort to create an atmosphere where emotions ran high and logic ran low. I asked confusing, manipulative questions, purposefully confusing timelines and events in order to trip her up and cause her to unwittingly expose the truth through her contradictions. One of my more insidious methods of control and surveillance included posing as my wife using her email and social media in order to send seductive messages to her acting out partners in attempts to draw out details of their affairs, attempting to set up meetings with them in hopes of physically harming them. I even convinced my wife to take part in the stalking and impersonation in order to prove to me that she was repentant. Although over the years I had collected enough evidence to support the reasonable conclusion that my wife had been unfaithful, none of my efforts to confuse, manipulate, or interrogate were successful at drawing out a true confession. Her efforts at gaslighting, however, were having their desired effect. The tighter she held to her story, the more I questioned my own sanity. Why hadn't she admitted anything? Am I making all this up? And if it's not true, what should I make of all of this, quote, evidence? I considered showing the evidence to someone else to see if they'd draw the same conclusion that I had, but I was too ashamed. So instead, I just kept digging. Proving infidelity at this point had become a peripheral concern, however. Proving my sanity was my new mission. I discovered some explicit text messages at the end of 2020, about 8 years after having first confronted my wife. These messages, I imagined, would surely end the madness, and explicit though they were, she was not dissuaded. I had misinterpreted them, I was told. Then she offered me the ubiquitous "we're just friends" line. You know you're in trouble when the word "just" appears before the word "friends." It was just another attempt to gaslight, but this one backfired. At that point, I knew I wasn't crazy because just friends do not talk to one another like that. And it was 2 months later that I discovered the smoking gun. She confessed and offered a solemn oath that her disclosure had been presented unabridged. Spoiler alert, there was more yet to be revealed. She entered recovery shortly thereafter, however, and after having attended meetings for a couple of months, she gave me the number of one of her sponsor's fiance. She told me that he might be able to help me with how I was feeling. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the single most important phone call that I would ever make. This gentleman told me about S-Anon and gave me Kevin H's number, who would eventually become my sponsor. I attended my first meeting the next day, and I'd like to say that I took to it right away, but I didn't. I made excuses not to go to meetings. I rarely called my sponsor. I did 0 step work. I didn't even work a half-assed program. I worked like an 8th-assed program. 4 months after finding S-Anon, my bottom was in sight. Unconvinced that her most recent forced disclosure had been complete, I went pain shopping. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, that means snooping. So I went pain shopping and I found a journal that contained notes for some step work that she had been doing with her sponsor. And this is so sick, y'all. Found a journal containing step work and I dug right in and read it all. This is her recovery stuff. I couldn't even let her have that one thing. I discovered in that journal a list of all the people that she had acted out with during our marriage. All the people that I'd suspected over the years that she'd denied, they were all on that list, along with 3 others that I had known nothing about. This was D-Day 2.0 here, y'all. And this one, given who 2 of those people were, was particularly difficult for me. For several days, I was unable to keep it together, to focus on work, or to allow my sponsor to help me work through it. And the things that I texted her in the few days after that discovery make me cringe to think over them. There's not an English word that I can think of that can truly describe how awful my comments were. I don't know how else to express it except to say I committed heinous acts of verbal violence against her. And I had hit bottom. I'd spent 10 of my 40 years isolated and living in obsession with maintaining control over things I'd never had any control over. I had given over to my insanity 25% of my life, which was quite enough. Finally gave up on the fantasy that my problems could be solved apart from the abandonment of my own will and the complete surrender to God's. And so humbled, I finally admitted defeat. Shifting gears a bit, I'd like to discuss what happened in my recovery to get me from a guy who, after 8 months in the program, was still as miserable as he was on day one, to a guy who's living his very best life right now. These are the tools that I have used and still use in recovery, beginning with the standard issue toolbox that every newcomer has available to him. These are meetings, sponsorship, step work, and service work. Perhaps a bit obvious, but these are foundational to recovery. With regard to meetings, I can say that from my experience, consistent, frequent meeting attendance is the single most important thing early on, if for no other reason than needing to be able to identify someone who you would want to be your sponsor, which leads into sponsorship. Your sponsor is someone who you will share all the funky stuff inside your head with, and with whom you will work the steps, which brings us to step work. Since the steps are the roadmap to recovery, you have to work them for your program to work. This is a 12-step program. It's right in the name. After 9 months in the program, I realized that there was no reason to be in a 12-step program if I wasn't working the steps. And the final tool in the standard issue toolbox is service work. If your program is stalled or it's become sluggish or you're feeling indifferent or unmotivated, a really cool, quick way to get a sort of boost or jolt of recovery energy is to begin doing service work. It'll also spark an appreciation in you for your program, for your sponsor, and the other members in your program. Some other tools I use are acronyms, a few acronyms that I am fond of. First being DETACH. This stands for don't even think about changing him or her. This is yet another way I remember not to control, manage, fix, or troubleshoot other people. It keeps me on my side of the street. Think. If I have something to say to someone that is of a sensitive nature, think helps me assess my motives. Is what I have to say true, helpful, inspiring, necessary, and kind? If I answer no to any of those, then I'm not coming at it from a good place. So my next steps are to shut my mouth, and perhaps take a fear and resentment inventory. And the final acronym here, HALTS. Assuming my motivations are pure, how is my timing? Have my physical needs been met? Am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or stressed? Yes answer to any of these means it's the wrong time for me to have a serious chat. As my sponsor says, HALTS always wins. The following slogans are workhorses in my recovery. The first being, how important is it? I use this one every single day. If it's not important enough that I would willingly sacrifice my emotional sobriety to sort out the situation, then it's not important at all. It reminds me that if something's out of my control, why try to control it? And if it's within my control, then it's under control, and there's no need to lose control. Second, this too shall bless. This is a variation of this too shall pass. This too shall bless challenges me to proactively seek a solution within a disturbance, looking for ways the situation can be a blessing. Thus, the disturbance itself becomes the vehicle through which serenity is restored, rather than just waiting around for the problem to go away. And the final slogan that I like to talk about is not my pig, not my farm. This one isn't exactly a program tool, but it works for me. Not my pig, not my farm. Since I don't own the pig and I don't own the farm, it's not my problem and therefore none of my business. The only business I have any business in is my own business. And even so, if it is my business, I'm the pig and it's God's farm. And back in step 3, I made a decision to quit acting like I own the farm. And I mean, really, a pig running a farm, that's crazy talk. Come on. Okay, the next tool we're going to talk about is handwriting. And by handwriting, I mean writing on your hand. With a Sharpie, I write OA on my left palm and EA on my right palm. Every time I see OA on my hand, it reminds me to keep my opinions and advice to myself, allowing my family and fellows the dignity of being able to think for themselves and to act on their own behalf. Unless they ask, I stay out of their business. And if they ask, I speak only from my own experience. And every time I see EA on my hand, it reminds me to manage my expectations and assumptions. In other words, don't have any. If I have no expectations and I make no assumptions, I can't be let down and therefore cannot develop any resentments. And the last tool that we'll talk about, this one is of my own design. This is my trigger plan. Triggers used to be very bad for me. They'd come out of nowhere, oftentimes while I was in public or otherwise, or at work. With this plan, I simply choose from 3 predetermined solution-based actions that I can take when I'm triggered, depending on how much time I have to devote to the solution. In this way, I'll know exactly what I'll do at a moment's notice, whether I'm at home or in public. First action should take no longer than 5 minutes, and I can do it at work. This might be just a quick call to my sponsor. The second action should take no more than 10 minutes. And again, I can do it at work. This might be a quick gratitude list. The third action can be any action, taking anywhere without time constraint. This might be going to a meeting, doing some step work, or having a more in-depth conversation with my sponsor. And in this trigger plan, there's also a fail-safe action, which is in case I can't take any of the other 3 actions for some reason, or in case they fail to adequately deal with the trigger. There's nothing programmatic about it. It doesn't solve any problems. I use it as a last resort to immediately diffuse any developing resentments. It just takes a few seconds. The fail-safe action is to wiggle like this. For those of you who can't see what I'm doing, I'm attempting to wiggle like a worm. You know why children wiggle? Because it's fun. They like it. You know why I wiggle? Because it's impossible to be angry, humiliated, betrayed, ashamed, or jealous while you're wiggling. It's ridiculous, I know, but that's the whole point of the fail-safe. You might think I'm an idiot now, but I guarantee you it might not be tomorrow or the next week, but somebody in this room is going to have an emotional event that leaves them angry, jealous, resentful, something. Pissed off, a scowl on your face, and you're going to remember me telling you to wiggle. And you're going to make sure no one is looking, and you're going to wiggle and you're going to feel better. By the way, you don't have to wiggle like a worm. You can substitute your own wiggle if you'd like. My wife's wiggle is more like a groove. Whatever else I do, I don't talk to my wife about my triggers. That's what my sponsor's for. That's what my program's for. All right, moving right along to discuss some program miracles. I've certainly had a lot of them in my recovery since I started working the steps. That's not a hint. To illustrate, I'd like to offer the following anecdote. Since I joined S-Anon about 21 months ago, my wife and I have attended 5 conferences. I'd like for you to pay attention to the change in my attitude and demeanor as I walk you through my experiences at these conferences. The first conference was in Wichita in the spring of 2022. I had done 0 step work up to this point. During our 4-hour drive to my sponsor Kevin's house for the pre-conference fellowship, I was filled with resentment. All I could think of was how stupid the conference would be, how stupid recovery is, how stupid my wife is, and how stupid sexaholism is. Shortly after we arrived at my sponsor's house, the only program friend that I had at the time texted me and asked how things were going. What follows is my actual response. I'm at Kevin's at the moment, been here for a bit. All these people are overwhelming. They all know each other. This is really uncomfortable. All these recovery people saying all these recovery things, Sarasota this, Wichita that. It's hard to imagine they actually like doing this stuff. They keep trying to talk to me, but after I say, hi, I'm Matt, I'm from St. Louis, I've run out of things to talk about. I'll say this though, Kevin seems authentic. He lives and breathes this stuff. Everything is recovery with him. I asked him earlier if I could borrow a phone charger, and he said something like, you know, when I have needs, I try to run service concept number 4 or whatever through my brain and my body and blah, blah, blah. I have no idea how to respond to that, and he never told me if I could borrow the charger. Man, I need a beer. The second conference was a 1-day deal in Lincoln, Nebraska, late August of 2022. I'd worked steps 1 through 3 by myself, but not with my sponsor. I wasn't grateful to be there, but I wasn't resentful either. I was neutral. And while I was there, however, I did come to an awareness that fear and my desire to control my wife's recovery were masquerading as boundaries. So there was a little progress there. The third conference was back in Wichita, early October last year. I was working step 8 at the time. My wife and I were listening to one of the conference speakers when I began to experience a peculiar, unfamiliar emotion. It was sort of a pleasant feeling. And I wanted to share that with my wife, but I didn't want to be disruptive. So I turned to her and I just stared with kind of a stupid grin on my face. I could tell that she was trying to ignore me and listen to the speaker, but I kept staring. Finally, she broke down and said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Oh man, this is so cool that we get to do this together, this recovery stuff." She said, "It sure is, Matt. Now, do you mind?" I was 10 months in at the time, and I've since come to understand that foreign emotion I was feeling was gratitude. Conference number 4 was in Kansas City this past April. 16 months into recovery, I finished all my step work and stood before a couple hundred essays and S-Anon as a keynote speaker, privileged and honored to be sharing my experience, strength, and hope. My 5th conference was a 4-hour Zoom marathon a couple of months ago, wherein both my wife and I shared our stories together. And now here I am sharing on Rico 12, a recovery ministry that recently celebrated 100,000 downloads. That's pretty cool, y'all. That's a profound transformation for a guy who used to consider himself a lost cause. God is real. Here's some other miracles that I've experienced in S-Anon. I wake up every day living the serene life. I no longer worry about what obstacles I'll have to face on a given day. I face my problems head on, confident that I have the tools to handle them. This past March was a really cool month for me. Inspired by changes that have occurred in my relationships and in my life, my son and 3 of my sisters attended their first meeting for their respective programs on the same day. 5 days later, my daughter texted me saying that my son had vouched for me by saying that I had changed. So she said she was willing to take a chance and hear me out while I offered amends, which I promptly did. And most importantly, guys, today I love my wife and I love to love her. I'm not ashamed of her. I'm not embarrassed by her addiction. I do not regret nor wish to undo any action she took in her addiction. Today, I'm not only grateful to God that I'm married to a sexaholic, but I am honored that he considers me worthy enough to be married to one. Now, that's the kind of mind-boggling, weird thing that my sponsor would say to me in the beginning, making me think that at some point someone was going to jump out of the shadows with a cup of Kool-Aid and say, "Drink up, Johnny." And the last thing, it used to be difficult to imagine life being worse than it was. Now it's hard to imagine that it can get any better. All right, I'm going to wrap it up real quick here, guys. I've come a long way in recovery, but as with the mosquito in a nudist colony, I've got a lot of work to do. Nevertheless, I live in reality in the moment, grateful for what I have, content with the work that God has done in me thus far, and I'm excited to see tomorrow's new version of me. He's helped me to tear down my fantasies and to realize that everything that I have today is all that I need and everything I've ever wanted. To paraphrase Gene Wilder from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, you know what happened to the man who suddenly got everything he ever wanted? He lived happily ever after. And with that, I too shall pass. Thank you for letting me share.
Matt, that was awesome. Thank you so much for your share, for the vulnerability, for the real, and for the hope. Man, that's awesome. I know that there are many people who are in a similar experience similar things. And this talk is going to provide a lot of hope and insight for that. Thank you so much for that. Now, I've written down a few questions. Live audience, if you have questions for Matt, please type them in the Q&A link there at the bottom of your window. We'll get to those as we go along. And we'll start off with a question from our live audience. This is from Candy. Candy says, "Wow, how is it you don't regret any of her cheating incidents? I can appreciate that you've come to a place where you're grateful for your journey and all of that was part of it, but not regretting being cheated on? Do tell. Thank you so much."
That is a great question. How do I not regret any of it? Because I'm living my best life. If it wasn't for any of that, I wouldn't be here today. I would be miserable, irritable. I mean, it wasn't until S-Anon that I ever experienced joy in my life. If it wasn't for the principles that I learned in S-Anon, I would still be drinking and drugging. And I might have perceived that I was living some sort of good life, but I would have had no idea how good it could be. I don't care how I got here. I'm grateful that I'm here.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So, Matt, at the very beginning, my internet dropped, but it appears that everything continued to go on just fine. Because when I was finally able to get in, everything was going smooth. So I missed part of your opening about the trauma. I got a little bit of that childhood trauma in there, and it sounds like it was drastic. Now you've got childhood trauma. You've got what I have heard called, and what I guess is called betrayal trauma from your wife. Tell us a little bit about the difference in those, the similarities, and how you deal with that in your daily life.
So I mentioned the childhood trauma, not because it was trauma to me, because honestly, anything that happened to me, I barely remember. One thing that happened to me, I don't remember at all. I use that simply to illustrate how rampant sexaholism was in my family. And I used to think that because I didn't really remember much of it, that it didn't really have an impact on me. But it certainly did in the way that I thought about sexaholism. When I was a child or a young adult, I didn't know there was such a thing as sexaholism. But the way that I thought about it, find something else new about one of the kids or did something to one of the other kids. And I would say things like, oh, that one's growing up to be just like his dad. Or, these kids keep playing doctor. One of them might actually grow up to become one. It was sick the way that it made me think. So that's why I put all that in there. Perhaps with some therapy, I might uncover some of that stuff. But for me now, it doesn't bother me. And I mention it because giraffes don't marry elephants, right? So I had all of this trauma, regardless of how it might have affected me. But it altered the way that I thought and how I felt. And so much sexaholism in my family, and I went and married one. And when I realized what sexaholism was, through my wife's addiction, it fueled all of the anger, resentment that I already had in me for all kinds of things. And it gave me an excuse to be the guy that I already was. And I didn't want to try to be anything different anymore, because now I have a reason. And I'll say this: I'm grateful for my wife's recovery, because I saw her getting well after a few months, and I was not, and I was pissed off about that at first, because how dare you do this to me, and then go and get well. But she said to me at some point, it wasn't an ultimatum as such, but I think she wrote me a short letter that said something like, I'm sorry for everything that I've done, but if you don't get well, I don't know if we're gonna make it. And I thought I better get my ass in gear. And I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that she was getting well, because here I am. Thanks for the question.
Yeah. I want to follow up on that. You said elephants don't marry giraffes, or giraffes don't marry elephants, whatever order you put it in. How would that have gone over with you in your 10 years of trying to control things, of trying to be being the victim, of trying to dig things out? If somebody would have come up to you and said, you married into this because, an elephant marries an elephant, a giraffe doesn't marry an elephant, you're an elephant just like that. How would you have reacted to that type of confrontation?
Probably would have started with some sort of rage and self-justification and who the F are you, and what, you don't know anything. And I probably later would have gotten good and drunk or good and high and marinated on that and come to the conclusion that I wasn't an elephant or a giraffe or whatever, and that I was the victim. And I might have followed that up with not talking to that person for a while, and maybe even saying something like, you're putting a mirror in front of yourself. Maybe you're the one with that problem, trying to control, manage, fix, or troubleshoot them, because I didn't have any problems. I'm a victim here, something like that.
Yeah. And how does that shift, though? I mean, you've obviously had this massive shift that happened. Do you remember the first time that kind of clicked in your mind and in your heart that there's something here that that is manifesting in my life?
Yeah, I think it was when I really started to get to work on step one. I don't know how step ones go in a lot of other programs, but in our step book for S-Anon, they ask a lot of questions, and it says somewhere in there that, a lot of people like to write a narrative of their significant relationships. And I got busy on that. I didn't realize prior to doing that I had these patterns of codependency or picking sexaholics as partners. But every one that I ever picked was a sexaholic. And through the patience of my sponsor and some other guys in the program, that statement that I made, giraffes don't marry elephants. I got that from a friend who had done some incredible recovery in just a few short months. And I realized that I was doing this. I was a giraffe and I married a giraffe. Now I don't have the sexaholism thing. And so what I mean by that is sick people married sick people. My sponsor says love cripples attract love cripples. And it was through working my first step in writing this narrative of my life that I realized I was a love cripple. And this was the pattern.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that, Matt. All right. A question came in earlier from Everly. Says, what was that acronym to stay on your own side of the street? Do you remember what that was?
Detach is one. Don't even think about changing him or her. That one is probably the most important because I'm a troubleshooter. I wanted to run my wife's recovery. I thought a lot of good that did for me. Didn't want to run my own, and I was good at giving advice to all kinds of other people because they had problems, and I could help them with that, and I could change them, and their lives could be good. So I detached from that and from those people and their problems, and I allow them the dignity of being able to think for themselves. And again, if they do ask my advice, I share from my experience, and that is it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Another question comes in from Jamie. Jamie says, I learned that my wife's sexual behavior was an addiction only after she got sober from alcohol and drugs in rehab. I've just started my S-Anon program, and my wife is working her AA steps and working with a counselor about her childhood traumas that led to all of this, but not with a CSAT, which is a certified sexual addiction therapist. Can this program succeed for me and thus my marriage if my wife doesn't work an SA program or work with a CSAT to get proper treatment for her sex addiction in addition to her AA work?
I don't know. The reason I say that is because I don't have any experience with that. Again, I speak only from my experience. I can say from my experience with other people in the program that it's going to be difficult if she's not working a program for sex addiction, if she's not working with the CSAT, because I've seen it in 1,000 other people. I'm blessed that my wife has seen a CSAT and that she's working SA. And that it's working for us, and we do other programs together. But unfortunately, I don't have any experience with that, so I can't say. I can say that it's difficult, though.
Thank you for sharing that, Matt. A couple of questions from Kevin. We'll just take them one at a time. The first question is, and this is one that I find fascinating also. How is it different being a man in S-Anon where the high majority of members in S-Anon are women?
Again, I don't know. I'm not a woman. I don't know what they go through. I can say that if there weren't these men's Zoom groups that I attended, they were already in place because of COVID, and that was my first experience with S-Anon. I tried going to some groups that were primarily women in the beginning and wanted nothing to do with it. I'll say that the perspective of men in S-Anon versus women in S-Anon it seems to be different. Men tend to be more solution oriented in my experience. And yes, there was a problem, but we're going to fix it. Right? We need a solution for this. And in my experience, the women in S-Anon, not so much. If I had only meetings where there were primarily women in them, I don't think I would have lasted. I don't think I would have stuck around. So truly grateful that there were these men's groups, and that I could learn to be vulnerable with men about my feelings and about what happened in my marriage and in my life. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. The second question from Kevin is, how do you get over betrayal from your wife as a man, where most men divorce their wives in that situation?
I love my wife, and I did realize, as codependent as I was, whatever, I knew long before we married that I wanted to be with this woman the rest of my life. I didn't want a divorce. I was already very familiar with addiction since I had so many in my life. At that point, when I realized that this was her problem, that it was an addiction, I thought, oh, okay, well, I mean, that's kind of cool because I'm familiar with addiction. This can be worked through. There's probably a 12-step program for this. And there was. And so, but the codependent troubleshooter that I was, I pressed her into recovery. I'm glad that I did because she's recovering, but I tried to run her program for her. Even long before I knew there was S-Anon or anything like it. I was so sick. I came up with like a 20-page plan for how she could recover from this. I wrote it all out. Strangely, it was very similar to what we go through in these 12 steps, but I didn't want to divorce her. It never really crossed my mind to divorce her. I did consider plenty of other ways I might take myself out of the equation. I will not get into that, but I didn't want to divorce her. I wanted this to be fixed, and I knew that it could be. I just was too immature to realize how that might happen early on. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. We've got lots of questions coming in, so we'll get to as many of these as we can. One of them I'll answer is saying, are there men-focused meetings in S-Anon? Yes, there are. And Matt, if you wouldn't mind emailing me a link to where people could find those, and I'll
Absolutely.
also have the women-focused S-Anon meetings available for those also. Next question was, what is S-Anon? So tell us a little bit about what S-Anon is and what it's based on, Matt.
Yeah. So at the beginning of my share, I read the S-Anon problem, and I won't read that whole thing again. But S-Anon is for people that are dealing with the sexaholism of a family member or friend. Could be any family member, any friend. If sexaholism has affected you, S-Anon is for you. Similar to how Al-Anon is for people who have been affected by someone's alcoholism. And Nar-Anon is for people who have been affected by somebody's drug use. So it just, so there's that. There's a whole nother aspect to it, which most people don't realize when they come to this. For me, S-Anon was going to be, at least I thought, a forum for complaining about my wife and her addiction, right? And other people would understand that because they've been through it. I didn't realize that I needed to do some heavy lifting in my own life and work on my own stuff and attain what is mysteriously called emotional sobriety. I'd heard about it a little bit, having attended a few AA meetings in my past. But there's this concept of emotional sobriety that was brought up again and again. And I had no idea what that looked like or how to know if I had it. But for me today, emotional sobriety is, I used to think it was about suppressing your emotions, the challenging ones, trying not to be angry when you were angry, trying not to feel betrayed when you were feeling betrayed. But it's nothing to do with that. Our emotions and our capacity to feel them are God-given and therefore not bad. So I learned that there's no such thing as a bad emotion. I now call them challenging emotions. And I don't try to suppress them anymore. I try to deal with them. And for me, when I lose my emotional sobriety, it's when I take a negative action as the result of my feelings, as a result of my emotions. And I can maintain emotional sobriety when I take a solution-based action when I feel one of those challenging emotions. I think I might have got a little bit off there, but hope that helps.
No, I appreciate it. I think God's guiding the wandering there. I think it was really good and helpful for many people. All right. Next question is from Sam. Sam says, I'm Sam and I'm a sexaholic. My wife has been anxious for months, not knowing if I will act out again or when I will. I've been sexually sober for over a year now. How do you deal with the fact that your spouse could decide to go out and maybe step out of your marriage?
That is a really good question. Actually, kind of a question that I was hoping someone would ask. I don't deal with it. And this actually touches on another question that Jamie asked, I think, earlier about how difficult it is to recover if somebody's not in recovery, if the spouse is not in recovery. Again, I have no experience with my spouse not being in recovery. I'm grateful that she is in recovery, and I see in everything that she does these days that she's working recovery. It's plainly obvious. It's plainly obvious when she wasn't sober, and it's plainly obvious today. that she is. Um, the way that she works her program, the meetings that she goes to, the sponsorship that she does, she lives and breathes recovery. And what a blessing that is. I don't worry if my wife is going to relapse. I think I would know it long before she relapsed because she wouldn't be working her program. And there'd be red flags everywhere. I don't think you can work a program as strong as she does and relapse. I just don't think it's possible. So for me, if there were red flags, then I would be concerned. But today there are none. And I just enjoy it one day at a time, living sober and living with a sober sexaholic. I love it.
I want to follow up on that, Matt, because would you have that same clarity of vision, do you think, if you weren't also working your own recovery in a healthy manner, or would you still be on edge thinking, when's the next shoe going to drop?
Yeah, not for a second would I be able to say that if I wasn't emotionally sober. Not for 1 second. And it was prior to emotional sobriety that I was like that every day. Oh my gosh, there's nothing. I can't trust anything that she says. I can't trust anything that she does. I can look at her list of recovery accomplishments and see nothing but what the next thing is going to be. The next, the next relapse. That's all I could see before. It was my pain, my betrayal, and all of the previous acting out, and what the next one might be, who the next one might be, where the next one might be, and how I was going to have to, get in there and try and fix it all. That is way emotionally unsober to be thinking like that. If it wasn't for S-Anon, I could not say that today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. I think I think this episode is going to help a lot of people, and I think it's going to anger a lot of people too, whose maybe sexaholic spouse is going to take it to their spouse and say, "Hey, listen to this," and they'll be like freaking out that somebody's telling them they're not a giraffe or whatever, But I'm loving this. Okay, I've got a couple more questions here. Do you still use the acrostic think, THINK, in your daily life and relationships? And can you give an example?
I do. And first of all, I'm glad that you called it an acrostic because it's not an acronym like people think, but I call it an acronym because that's what everybody calls it. Do I use that? Yeah, it's most of the recovery tools that I use are more subconscious now. In the beginning, I mean, I had to stop and do these things and think, what does think mean, and how am I going to apply this? Today, it just happens. I'll give you an example. The most challenging relationship that I have today is with my son, who's 17, and he acts quite like 17-year-olds do, and it can drive me freaking bonkers sometimes. And never mind the things that he does to do that, but I have to stop and apply these principles. Think, I want to yell at him, or I want to shame him almost subconsciously sometimes when he does something goofy. And I want to say things like, you always do this, or you always do that, or you'd never do this. And I have to stop. Is what I'm saying true? Well, those things are not true. He doesn't always do them. He doesn't never do something. So it's not true. Already, I've stopped what I was about to say because it wasn't true. Also, is it helpful to shame him for some behavior? Never once did shaming a human being ever do me any good. So it's not helpful. Is it inspiring? Certainly not inspiring. That's pretty obvious. Is it necessary to come at my son for something like that? No. And there's other ways to go about it. I've practiced that and I know they work. And it's certainly not any kind of kind thing that I would be doing to him if I were to approach him like that. So yeah, I do these things every day, all day long. And thankfully they've become second nature to me. I don't have to work hard at them anymore.
Matt, that leads me to one of the phrases that or mottos that you say you use. How important is it? Is this necessary that I shame or that I jump on this person? How important is it? Are you able to give an example in your real life as to when there was something that you were really boiling to get at, and then when you asked yourself, how important is this really, you were able to let it go?
Yeah, one thing, there was, man, I don't know, probably a year ago. This is when one of the times that I really realized that this stuff was working. I was sitting on the couch watching some show on Hulu, and my son and my wife were in the hallway, and they got into it about something. And the troubleshooter in me thought, I'm going to get in there and fix this. I'm trying to watch something. I got to sort this out. And then I thought to myself, well, how important is that? Do I need to be in there? Nope. I just sat down and happily watched the show that I was watching, and I realized, oh my gosh, I don't have to fix all these things. That would have ruined me if I had gotten in the middle of that. And guess what? My wife is perfectly capable of doing it. And it was probably an argument that amounted to just about nothing anyway. How important is it to yell at my son because he leaves his cereal bowl on the coffee table day after day after day? That's not important. It's just not important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Got a couple more questions we're going to get to here, I think, before we start wrapping things up. First one is from an anonymous attendee who says, how has the 12 steps helped you set boundaries, if it has?
Yeah, boundaries for me at first were more punishments than anything. I didn't understand the concept of a boundary. All I wanted was to punish my wife. I mentioned in my share about one of the conferences that I went to where I realized that my desire to control was fear masquerading as boundaries. So after a few sessions with her CSAT, the two of us, I still was so fearful. I was insisting on a polygraph, right? And the only question I wanted to ask her um, was, have you told me everything? Has everything you told me been true? Something like that. And I just wanted that one question, but I realized that was just fear in me trying to control her, and that it wasn't a boundary at all. And do I have boundaries today? Yeah, probably, but I haven't thought really hard about them. The sort of they've grown up around me through the process of recovery, through working the 12 steps. I just live a healthy life. More than anything, I have to set boundaries up for myself to not get in people's business, to not try to fix them, to not try to tell them how to run their program. My son's in recovery, and I want so bad to help him out, quote, help him out. So the boundaries that I have are for me to not do that, to not ask him how his recovery's going, to not suggest that he do one thing or another. So S-Anon for me is about my boundaries for myself more than anything.
Yeah, great answer or great experience there, Matt. And I think that leads into one of the questions I have here from Alan. And maybe you can share a little bit about this. Alan says, I have a sex addiction. What should I do, or what can I do to help my wife work recovery?
Stay off her back. It's her recovery to work. You can't do anything about it. Just work your own recovery. And I'm not an SA, so I can't speak from that perspective. But Alan, I can say this. I worked my program hard. Once I started working it, I worked it hard. I got through 12 steps in just a couple of months. And I didn't realize that I was an S-Anon success story until maybe 6 months later, when my son asked me about recovery. He wanted to talk about recovery. And I had a feeling I knew what he was going for. And so I started talking to him about S-Anon. He said, no, Dad, not that. It's something else. I said, well, I can put you in touch with somebody else. But the reason I mentioned that is because I worked my recovery. I got sober, and other people began to see that. My son saw it. 3 of my sisters on the same day, unbeknownst to me, attended their first S-Anon meeting because they saw something in me. My wife started S-Anon because of something she saw in me. My daughter called me and allowed me to make amends to her because of the reputation that I was building. It used to be that people trusted in me because they were not aware of my reputation. Now they trust me because of my reputation. And that's because I've worked these 12 steps and I apply these principles to everything that I do. Every decision that I make, everything that I think, every action I take, somehow I filter through these principles that I've learned in S-Anon. And people see that, and they see a difference in me, and they want what I have. And just the same as I saw a change in my wife and I wanted what she had, and that spurred me to start to work my own program. It may just be, sir, that if you work your program, your wife might see something that she wants.
Thank you so much, Matt. And we've got to wrap things up here. We're coming up to the top of the hour and need to finish up with a couple of things here. Before we go into the closer, do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us?
Absolutely. Work the steps, guys. Changes your life. Work the steps. That's it.
Love it. Thank you so much, Matt. And we've got a few more questions that are on the docket here. I will get those posted in the WhatsApp group so that anybody can get in there and share their own experience, strength, and hope on them if they wish. Matt, if you are in that WhatsApp group, or if you would like to join, feel free to do so and answer any questions that will be posted in there. In order to get in the WhatsApp group, send an email to rico12pod@gmail.com, RECO12POD@gmail.com, and we'll get those questions posted in there within the next couple of hours. So thank you very much, Matt. A very good RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting. And like I said, we've got questions that we'll post in that WhatsApp group. If you out there were inspired and want to share something of your insights in a 12-step type share, please go to RICO 12 Shares SpeakPipe link and record your 3 to 4 minute share there. If you've not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please consider doing that now. It's a great way to work step 12 and sharing this message with others. I invite the audience to come back next week when we will be hearing from Bob L., another RICO 12 first-timer who will be speaking to us on the topic of service. I'm looking forward to his take on this topic. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with a prayer. It's the thank you prayer that Matt will be saying for us.
Yeah, guys, I used to like to end meetings that I would lead with the serenity prayer, but I often got tongue-tied. I've said it a million times, but got tongue-tied somehow. My sponsor taught me a really cool, very simple prayer that is impossible for me to forget. It's called the thank you prayer. It goes like this. God, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Amen.
Amen. And thank you, Matt. Everybody remember, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
Hear, hear.
I've seen stars fall from above. I've fallen in and out of love. I've been high and I've been low. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. I've seen a boy become a man. He got lost without a plan. He's so far away from home. Now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. I'm looking for the words to say. You make the world a better place, and I can call that place my home. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. So let me see just what you need to set you free, so we can be free. I saw stars fall from above. I fell in and out of love. I got high and I fell low. But now I know can't do this on my own. No, I just can't do this on my own. I just can't do this on my own.